In this video, we're going to look at the quantitative analysis lab. And it's not a replacement for doing the lab in person, but if you have been out, you'll get to see the lab. And when you come in person, I think you'll be more ready to take that on. So I'm just going to do a quick screen share and grab a couple documents that you have. The first one is the quantitative analysis lab packet. That's the main one that you have there. And what happens is you have a series of 5 labs. Part 1 is preparing a standard base, and parts 2, 3, and 4 are separate titrations. Part 5 is about buffers, and that is optional, or that is not going to be required. So let's talk about the standard base and the preparation of that. We're preparing 250 milliliters of 0.25 molar NaOH solution. And you should be able to calculate and figure out how many grams you need. It should be more than 1, less than 10, if that's a hint for what you're going to be doing. And then what you're going to do is you are going to add that to water, not 250 milliliters of water, but enough water to get to 250 milliliters. Okay, you can probably see right up in here, I have a volumetric flask, and I don't think you can see it's a 250 milliliter volumetric flask. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to weigh out my solid sodium hydroxide. I'm going to put it in this container and then add water to the 250 milliliter mark. I don't know if you can see that right here. There's an etch mark right where my finger is. It's a little mark in the glass. And what happens is when the water is up to that mark, that's the 250 milliliter mark. So I'm going to add my solid, add water up to the 250 milliliter mark, and then I'm going to invert this back and forth a number of times until it's all dissolved. Now, ideally, I could just keep this and keep running different titrations with this standard base. Because I don't have a lot of these volumetric flasks, I'm going to put it into a plastic cup and I'm going to label it, and then each group has that labeled, and then they can just grab that cup and add their base to their burette when it's time to do that. So that is the making of a standard base solution. Notice there's a question about pH right there. What's going to happen is you're going to do a series of titration. One, you're going to be titrating vinegar, okay, with your standard base. Vinegar is acetic acid, which is a weak acid. You're going to titrate it with your base. There's a pre-lab, and then I think the data is important to know. You have an initial burette reading, the final burette reading. The difference is how much base you have. Okay, or that's how many milliliters of base you have. Okay, if you know the liters of base and you know we're using 0.250 molar base, you could figure out the moles of the base used. In a titration, moles of base equals moles of acid, and that will be helpful when you do calculations. And I believe we're using 10 milliliters of vinegar in this titration. Let's see. So that's going to be one titration you're going to be doing. The next one you're going to be doing is titrating a solid unknown, what we call triprotic acid. But you're going to have a data table that's similar, but the calculations will vary to correspond to this new experiment. And then part 4 is the third titration, okay, the analysis of antacid tablets. So I think we have some Tums or some type of antacid. We're going to add that to some hydrochloric acid, and then we're going to titrate it with our NaOH base. And there's some questions associated with that. This part on buffers is not going to be, or is not required in step 5. But notice all 3 of the titrations, part 4 with the antacid, you got a table. Part 3 with the solid unknown acid, you have a table. In part 2 with the vinegar, you're going to have another data table to complete, and then corresponding questions with that. Okay, let me just go to the very first page, because this is a summary of the general procedure for titrations. Okay, we did a titration last week, and I'm going to be using essentially that format right here. So what happens is we're actually doing 0.25 molar NaOH in all our titrations, and you are going to actually, instead of me putting the stuff in the burette, you're going to need to do that. So that's what happens. You have your standard base and you're going to transfer it to the burette, and then you're going to be able to perform your titration there. Okay, so you fill this up and do that. I said make sure the burette is mostly full. So remember the burette actually runs from what, 0 on the top to 50 on the bottom. So you should have at least 40 milliliters capacity there, because it might take that much to do some of your titrations, or close to 40 milliliters. So you want to have enough in there to do that. Let's say you don't have enough, just add more of your standard base that you make. The standard base you make in part 1 should be able to be used for parts 2, 3, and 4. If you run out, you can always make more, but it probably will be enough. Okay, so then these are just the general rules that you're going to be following. You're filling the burette. When you fill an empty burette, you burp it, record your initial base reading, and then in the first experiment, it says acid, but part 2, when you're using vinegar, it tells you 10 milliliters. Okay, so just follow the instructions, whether it's part 2 or 3 or 4 for your acid. It's going to vary a little bit. Okay, follow this procedure for measuring volumes and the phenolphthalein. Ultimately, some of these things are going to be weak acids that we're working with, and the endpoint won't be so sharp as where it's clear and then us in very purple. It's going to be more of a transition. But if you see something that's pink and it's persisting while it's swirled for 30 seconds, you have reached the endpoint. So that's what you're looking for at the endpoint of all these titrations. Okay, you should be able to repeat that experiment and get your volume, and it should titrate within a milliliter of your other one. If you get 2 volumes within a milliliter of each other, you can be pretty confident in your accuracy or precision, at least with the titration, and then you can use those values for your calculations. Okay, so that's the general procedure you can refer back to. Okay, so just going back to doing the labs, answering the questions. When I do the analysis of vinegar, I'll answer the pre-lab questions. I don't have to write all those steps of the procedure I just showed you, but probably more important to summarize the key things for this one. Like it's 10 milliliters of vinegar that you're titrating, and a few of the key points right there. Fill in your data, answer the following questions, and ultimately you're going to figure out the percent mass of vinegar and acetic acid. When you get to the tripronic acid, gives you the procedure and things that you're going to do. Note those adjustments when you write your procedure summary. Okay, you get your data, and then you're able to answer the questions. Ultimately, we want to determine the molar mass of that unknown acid. So that's one of those where I'm going to check more closely, because it's an unknown, and see what you can do, how accurately you can do that. In the last experiment, the analysis of an antacid, we actually take an antacid, okay, which is a base, and then we combine it with an acid. We have more acid here than base, so it's going to be acidic solution. And then I titrate back with the base to get equal moles of acid and base in there. Ultimately, we can do some calculations to figure out how much acid that antacid neutralized. But the calculations will lead you there. Okay, and then this part 5 with the buffer is not required. So that's a short summary of what we're going to be doing. Even if you're absent, you'll need to come back in and make up or do these labs, because titration is really a skill, and you have to do it. Just like, I guess, parallel parking is a skill. You just got to parallel park in order to learn to do that. All right, hope that helps get you ready when you come back in lab. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.